Good morning, everyone. Mr. Terrell here with your e-learning assignment for May the 8th, 2020. Today we're going to be talking about employment legislation and the laws that exist to both protect our workers in both agriculture as well as other industries, and kind of the mentality behind some of those laws, and also what employees and their employers are required to do to be in compliance with those laws. So we will discuss some of these laws. You'll have some questions to do for your assignment, and that will be your e-learning for today. So let's get started. So one thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to especially agriculture is child labor. And basically, agriculture is the one of the very few exceptions to a lot of the child labor laws that exist that, regulate um, the age in which a person can actually work a job. And the mentality behind that is the average family farm relies on, all members of the family to pitch in. So mom, dad, uh, sometimes grandma, grandpa, and also the kids have responsibilities on the farm. So agriculture is given kind of some immunity to a lot of these laws, but other industries are very, very heavily regulated when it comes to child labor. When you think about it, the reason behind that is if you look at history, back during, the Industrial Revolution and even into the, early 1900s, children were working in factories, very, very dangerous conditions at very young ages. They were, foregoing their education. They were dropping out of school because they were being forced to work and earn money for their families. So we obviously wanted to try to get away from that, and that's where child labor laws come into play. So, child labor employees may be defined as individuals under the age of 18 working in return for payment. And that's not to say that you can't work a job under the age of 18. Many of you have jobs, and you are under the age of 18. But just know that if you are under the age of 18, your employment is more restricted than those that work that are over the age of 18. So, on the federal and state levels, laws have been established to protect those individuals. So, most laws prohibit the employment of individuals less than 16 years old in all all occupations. So, most places, if you go to apply for a job, one of their first questions are going to be, "Are you 16 years or older?" And that's because in order for them to be compliant, you have to be at least 16 to work. Other laws prohibit the employment of individuals under 18 years old in occupations that are particularly hazardous. So, jobs that are deemed to be very dangerous, you may not be able to work those until you're at least 18. And then, and this is the loophole that allows family farms to kind of get around this law. Some occupations apply to employment by a parent or a guardian. So if you are a young person and you work on your family farm for mom or dad, that kind of gets you around that rule. And oftentimes, if you are, it's kind of on a state by state basis, but if you are under the age of 18, you will have to get a work permit, and the number of hours that you can work is limited as well. So, work by family members, the members of a farmer's immediate family who live with the farmer are exempt from practically all child labor laws while employed by the farmer. And once again, that's what allows family farms to get around this and allow their children to work on the farm, which is very important. Most family farms are sustainable because all members of the family pitch in. So it's important that exemption exists for farms. Non-family minors, 16 years or older, or minors can be employed in any agricultural occupation at any time. So agriculture in general is very, very flexible in that regard. So that's why those of you that maybe, You don't work for your family doesn't farm, or you don't work for your parents on a farm, but you work for someone in the community. Maybe your neighbor, you help them in the spring and in the fall. Okay, that's the exemption that allows you to do that. Non-family minors under 16 years of age, for those, employment of individuals in that age group depends on the particular occupations in which they will be working. So if you're a minor under the age of 16, you cannot be employed at any time in an agricultural operation that is deemed hazardous by the U.S. Secretary of Labor. However, if it is deemed a non-hazardous occupation, minors cannot be employed in non-hazardous occupations just during normal school hours. So if it's outside of school hours and it's not hazardous, you're good to go. If the child is under 14, parental consent is required. So let's look at some of the other laws that impact employment and impact agriculture as well. The first law we'll look at is the Fair Labor Standards Act. And the Fair Labor Standards Act is federal legislation that addresses minimum wage for workers. You've probably heard the term minimum wage. And minimum wage refers to the minimum amount of money that a company can pay their employees. So before this law existed, there was nothing that protected the workers. There was no law that um, said what they had to pay those workers and what benefits they had to offer them. And as a result, many companies were exploiting their workers. They were paying them poor wages, making them work in very dangerous conditions, and quite frankly, it wasn't fair for the workers. So legislation like the Fair Labor and Standard Act established a minimum wage. So the minimum amount of money that a company can legally pay their employees, and it varies state to state. For Indiana, the minimum wage is $7.25. For other company or other states, it's higher, um, but for Indiana, it is $7.25. You can't legally pay someone less than that to complete a job. So the Fair Labor and Standards Act does not cover all agricultural workers, so it doesn't apply to everything. Some of the people not included include workers who are employed by farmers using 500 or fewer worker days of labor during each quarter of the year. So a worker day is any day in which an employee works at least 1 hour. Okay, so if you either don't have very many employees or you don't work many days out of the year, maybe you only operate a seasonal business, um, you can get by with not complying with the Fair Labor Standards Act. So those people not included also include harvest workers and workers under 16 years old who are employed on the same farm as their parents and who are paid on a piece rate basis. Okay, so piece rate basis is something, it's not as common in agriculture as probably what it once was. It's, we're now more accustomed to being paid by the hour or being paid on a salary basis, but it wasn't uncommon at one point in time, especially in agriculture, for workers to be paid on a piece rate basis, meaning you get paid 5 cents for every bale of hay that you stack, or you get paid, um, you know, 10 cents for every bushel of wheat that you harvest. That's something that existed. We don't see it so much anymore, and one reason why we don't see it so much is because you know it doesn't allow businesses to uh, utilize the minimum wage laws that exist. So, a couple exceptions to that rule. So, all agricultural workers are excluded from the requirement of overtime pay for hours worked in excess of 40 hours per week. So, you do not have to pay agricultural workers overtime which means time and a half or double time rates if they are working more than 40 hours a week. Now, the reason behind that is that agriculture, in many senses, is a time sensitive job. It is very seasonal. When you're working a lot of hours. During planting season, for example, farmers might work all through the night just to get their crops planted. And same goes for harvest. So to limit farmers to 40 hours a week and only being able to pay their employees normal rates for 40 hours a week would put a lot of restriction on agriculture. So that's kind of why they they get around that rule. The Occupation Health and Safety Act. And the Occupational Safety and Worker Health is covered by the Federal Occupational Health and Safety Act, which provides standards intended to reduce work-related injuries, and it requires employers to furnish a workplace free of recognized hazards. And this is another law that kind of comes out of that Industrial Revolution time period. Basically, factories began to be built at a very rapid rate across the country, and they were largely unregulated. So as a result, oftentimes they were very dangerous. The employees were subjected to very dangerous conditions, and to help protect the employees, the Occupational Health and Safety Act was established. So just one example, agriculture we know is a very dangerous profession. There's a lot of hazards associated with farming. So, one example of a hazard associated with farming, anhydrous ammonia. Some of you may be familiar with anhydrous ammonia, others may not be, but basically it is a chemical that is utilized as a fertilizer. It's a very, very common source of nitrogen that farmers use on their farm fields to provide nitrogen for corn growth. And it is very, very toxic, very, very dangerous if you come in contact with it in its purest form. So, one example of the Occupational Safety and Health Act is that it requires personal protective equipment, or PPE, to be used by employees who handle anhydrous ammonia. So things like gloves, goggles, you might have to keep water around for rinsing if it gets in your eyes or on your skin. Um, just one example. Another example would be rollover protection. So tractors are, at one point in time, were very prone to rollovers, particularly the early tractors that didn't have cabs on them. See the tractor here, it's a very old tractor. That tractor was made in the 1940s, roughly. So a lot of farms still utilize very old tractors, and those old tractors didn't have any sort of cab on them. And if you were driving up a hill or driving on a hillside, or going down a hill, rollovers were a very dangerous thing, because think about it. If you're sitting on that tractor with no cab at all, no protection, it's completely open, and that tractor rolls over, what happens to you? Well, you get crushed, right? You get crushed, and you perish, or at best you're very, very terribly injured. And these rollovers were happening all the time. So one of the provisions in the Occupational Safety and Health Act was that all tractors over 20 horsepower have to be equipped with a seat belt and a cab or a protective frame. So what they did was, for a lot of those tractors that didn't have a cab, they went in and put what they called a ROPS, rollover protection system. Basically, it's just a bar up here, so that if this tractor were to roll over, this bar would keep the back end of the tractor off the ground, and would hopefully protect the driver from being crushed. Okay, another example of protection in uh, agriculture through the Occupational Safety and Health Act. All tractors over 20 horsepower have to have that rollover bar. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop there for right now. You have some questions on Canvas that you need to answer. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you all on Monday.